If you have any technical issues and you can't hear us, then please do let us know in the chat. Thank you. Fabulous. Well, it's brilliant to be here tonight, and this is one of our very first Q&A sessions, and it's brilliant to get stuck in with our conversation today. So Casey J, thank you so much for joining us. It's a complete pleasure to have you here. And also, it's just brilliant to be able to kind of sit down and reflect on both your work on Viola's Room, but also with Punch Drunk more widely.
Yeah.
But actually, where I'd love to start is I know that you wear many hats within your creative work, but also there's so much about Viola's Room and about the work that Punch Drunk creates that focuses on that audience feeling, that audience sense of being involved in the action. I would love to know, as an audience member yourself, when you either are a consumer of art or consumer of theatre, what feeling means to you? What is it about kind of engaging the gut and kind of really engaging with feeling as an audience member that gets you excited when you see work?
Oh, that's a really good question, Georgia. I really enjoy. The bottom line is I'll enjoy a show if I'll go along and cry.
Yes, good.
The very best. Like, I just want to have like something cathartic, a release of emotions. I'm interested in lots of different things in the same way, I might watch a, comedy one evening, something else the other evening. But the things that really stick with me are the ones where my mind can leap off from the different moments in the show, so I can make all those neural pathways, all those connections are firing, and there's something that resonates in my own life. That's my personal. That's what I am seeking out when I'm looking for stuff.
Yeah, I love it.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Well, I'm also the same as you, that if I can laugh and if I can cry in anything, then I'm super happy.
Yeah.
But I think there's something so magical about Viola's Room specifically, that is that sense of engaging with the horror of that kind of new genre. And I'm really curious to know, how you were beginning to think about Viola's Room, whether it was, and whether you've worked with horror before as a genre, or whether this was kind of a first time, look into that kind of work.
That's actually I don't know, I don't think Georgia, no, I don't think you know this. The first show I ever made, like when my aspirations were, I work, as Georgia said, I wear many hats. I'm a theatre maker, and that's led me into design that's more installation-based, narrative installations, immersive theatre, more so than traditional theatre.
Yeah.
And the very first thing I took to the Fringe when I was like 21 or 22 was The Turn of the Screw.
Amazing.
And look, honestly, I think it was probably awful. I think it was probably so bad. And I think we only realised once we decided that's what we were doing, how challenging horror and psychological thrillers are to like what
that actually make
a hideous challenge to set yourself as a 21-year-old. But we didn't have so bad a time that we all decided it was awful and wanted to never make a show again. So
okay, that's positive.
So that was positive. But yeah, so yes, I have, and it was really nice to revisit it, having had the experience of a career rather than just like emerging into the world as a student, going, okay, I guess we'll do this iconic gothic horror.
I'd also love to be a bit nosy for a second, because could you unpack, what your kind of career has looked like to date? Because there's so much where you were beginning, maybe not as, the designer that you're working in right now, but I would love to just touch upon how you began engaging with theatre and kind of your journey up until this point working with Punch Drunk.
Yeah. I think the thing that first engaged me about sort of non-traditional forms, and like a lot of people who end up in the arts or find themselves working in the arts, while I was at school, I was drawn to the art department and the drama department, and I just found myself there doing any of their extracurricular activities, but at that point not really understanding what it is within a career that you're actually seeking out. And then it was when I first went up to the Edinburgh Fringe when I was maybe 19 years old, and I saw a company who were making work in this sort of like abandoned building, and they were a group of students, and they made 9 different spaces and divided them with fabrics and got a heap of old furniture from a removal company, and it blew my mind. And I was so excited by that. It opened my eyes to the different ways that you can engage with storytelling in live formats. It turned out that they were, while they were at university, they were being, or once they just graduated, they were being mentored by Punch Drunk.
Oh, wow.
I know, because they were making this they were making this work that was a non-traditional format where, you know, the audience are within it. And through that, they ended up getting joined up with Punch Drunk, part of some kind of, I don't know what the scheme was, but it really excited me. And then while I was at university, I first saw a Punch Drunk show, and it blew my mind. I'd already had this experience at the Fringe where I was like, wow, this is engaging. This is engaging me in a way that no like other traditional theatre has. And then I'd heard about Punch Drunk, and I finally saw this masked show. I saw Drown Man, and it blew my mind. I felt as though I was inside like a film.
Yeah.
And I was like spat out of this the service elevator on your way into the show by myself. I'm in this forest, and I was saying earlier, we did a masterclass earlier, that I don't know how much of this memory is now reimagined and reformed. Like, I don't know how much of it is actually a reinvention of what actually happened, but the experience and the feeling for me was like this swelling soundtrack and the darkness of the forest and the caravan park in the distance. And I felt like I was within this cinematic world. And so that really excited me. And that's why I think world building and theatre making was what was the path that I ended up going down.
World building is such a powerful word to use as well, because it's so potent. That first kind of Punch Drunk experience, or that first kind of immersive experience with anything, it just really brings you into your senses. But it really subverts all of the rules that you're expecting with theatre, with live experience. But also the sense of world building is such a vast. It's almost kind of too vast to comprehend in many ways. And I would really love to. I mean, we'll be able to get onto this a bit more. But for you, what does that word mean? Is it to do with, you know, there's world beyond the immediate, or is it in the level of detail and the truth in that immediate sense of touch?
Ooh, that's a good question. I think probably it's the exploration that it offers, which of course for Viola's room, it's a linear experience. It's not free roaming, but it's still a world building exercise. I think when I have done, and I only do it rarely, but when I have designed for more traditional theatre, you still enter with the same, or I still enter with the same approach that I would do on any of these installations or, you know, Punch Drunk shows. But so I think you can still apply it to the different forms, but I think it really makes sense here because it feels like there's a real parallel with the world building of computer games, video games as well.
Completely.
So for me, it's that. It's the excitement of discovery, and it's the unknown, I think, and filling that out and allowing exploration and curiosity.
I think that's so good, the sense of being able, the freedom to explore, but the freedom to also hold the unknown within it as well. I'd also love to just touch upon how you came to Punch Drunk. How, you know, what was your first shows that you were working on, and how did you discover the company as a professional yourself?
Well, from when I first saw the company
way back when,
I was like, I must work with them. They're brilliant. This is amazing. I need to be on the inside of this. How I came to Punch Drunk as a professional, I think there's a few different things that lined up that meant I ended up working on The Burnt City, which was the first show that I worked on with Punch Drunk. And sort of a combination of the different projects I've worked on in the past, because my own artistic practice, my focus is broadly a lot of narrative-led installations. So detailed, often small installations, but the level of detail that is, someone can come in, and I had an installation that it was like 6 foot by 8 foot, but it was like full to the rafters of a different like collection, memories of a lifetime, an archive of memories. But on the other hand, the big scale design, delivery, sort of more the production side of design, I'd I'd ended up working on a lot of kind of large scale commercial immersive projects. So I worked with, for years I worked on the Great Gatsby, which did London and it did a few other countries. I worked with a company called Shotgun Carousel they do a lot of immersive cabaret and dining, private events. And I also did I think the first time I dipped my toe in, because I started out design-wise with scenic art and props and puppetry. I made a lot of puppets, and I also worked in a workshop doing scenic art. And that led me into designing on games launches. So like Assassin's Creed, they're launching their new game, and then they've got a one-night event for all of their stakeholders, and we've got a really cool venue somewhere, and we need to go and recreate XYZ locations from the game. So really exciting, but very fast-paced. It's like get in, get out,
one night only.
okay, so in that respect, that was on the more of the delivery end, but it offered the opportunity to start the more world building side of design, where it's like everyone's going to come in, they're going to explore, I mean, for those events, people weren't paying to be there, they were there to just enjoy this launch of this game that they'd all either worked on or invested in. And so the combination of my artistic practice, making these narrative installations, with the more production design side of managing large teams and doing big get-ins, get-outs, I think that was the combination of factors that led me to, as soon as I saw the advert for the Burnt City, there was an advert for, props making teams, there was scenic art, there was dressers, buyers, and I think I did the big sin and just applied for all of them.
Everything,
Because I was like, well, I would just want to work there, and I couldn't see which I could have fit into any of the teams, but I was like, but I do have the skills for that or that.
All of us.
So I don't know where I'd be strongest pitching myself. And then ended up working as assistant head of design, because obviously they saw that this woman's applied to everything. So I think that, I do think it was a combo between the delivery end, but also I think that those small scale detailed installations, I know that some of those on my portfolio was probably the thing that tipped it over.
I really love that.
I don't know for sure, but I reckon. I don't know.
It is now.
Yeah.
So the Burnt City being your very first is a huge undertaking. So we're lucky enough now that we're on the set, we're sitting on the set of the Burnt City. Very different ball game to the Viola's Room, thinking about 100,000 square foot of warehouse space, thinking about a free roam masked show, which is what Punch Drunk's most well known for. Of course, Punch Drunk's had a long time to perfect, the amazing practice, and worked with the incredible designers, Libby and Bee, who have been so integral to so many shows here, especially the masked shows. But to come into that kind of practice into such a large scale show, how was that? How was coming in, and how was working within that design team on a free roam looped mask show?
It was amazing. I had the best time.
Yeah. Was it everything you dreamed?
It was so good. Yeah, it was. I mean, first thing that of course, as a set this scale, the team is humongous. There's so many people. Everyone is so talented. Everyone in that design team is an artist in their own way, and they bring every individual skill. The whole set would not come together without each and every person's very unique skill set. And that was really inspiring. I learned so much. I'd had heaps of experience on delivering large scale things and that production side, but there's just so much more that to do with the particular specific practice of this company that I think is what, when I'm looking at it from the outside, I'm like, well, I think that's what sets Punch Drunk apart from other companies that do similar work. And it was, I within however long it was that I was working on it, I think that it was just this steep and exciting learning curve. And the most amazing thing I'm so grateful for is how trusted that I was, and how I could see that the rest of the team was. We're coming into a company that a lot of us hadn't worked for before, because the team had to be so huge. So there's lots of new faces, and the senior designers that we were working with, on the show. So Livy and B, who designed the show, Jess Banting, who was the assistant designer, and Maito Jobdabal, who was the head of design and associate designer, they put so much trust in a group of new people that they had hired. And I worked closest with Maito, and yeah, to be trusted by someone who's working at that level enables you to completely advance and excel your own skill set. So I really owe a lot to that show in terms of what I'm able to work on and do now, because I learned so much from all of those guys.
And also the Burn City was my first show as well, and there was just something so special about coming into this company at that time and being able to see the work and what it does best. I'd love to just unpack a little about what it means to work in design on a show like the Burn City.
Yeah.
Who are we, when you say there are lots of different elements of design all coming together and everyone's skill set is shining, could you just unpack a little about who we're talking about when we talk about the design team?
Yeah, absolutely. So how our design team operated, we have our designers, we have Livy and B and Jess, who's the assistant designer. So they're working on the creative, on the concept side of it. And they've been working on it for a very long time. This show had been in development for a huge amount of time before I even stepped foot in the door, or anyone else on the design team had stepped foot in the door. On the delivery end, we have a head of design, Maito, who I was working with. I was her assistant. And then we've got our dressing team. The dressers are the people who come into the space with, carts full of props, set dressing, different trinkets, tokens, and actually physically dress the space. We've got our props team who do all the detailed making, all of the tiny details, that the Easter eggs and the juicy bits that you only find when you root through every drawer, making all of those details, working in the design room over in our other building, and the buying team, who was so crucial, like the sheer volume of things that need to be bought to fill 2 spaces this size. And so a lot of that is, it's kind of like computer based, but the really exciting side of it is that, every week they're at different markets, trailing around different to return and getting to know all of the different sellers. And then linked, but also on the kind of more production end of it, is the scenic art team. So when we're coming in and working with these huge architectural installations, how do we make that feel truthful and authentic? The same level of detail that you get on the tiny props is put into, the texture of a wall. And that team was led by a really, really brilliant, amazing woman called Charlotte Gainey, who is just one of the most experienced people I've ever worked with, and is so generous as well with her time and expertise. So, as I say, it was just a complete dream job, and I think it was really mutual. Everyone was learning from each other. It was really a brilliant.
And every single one of those elements need to connect, and it's so interlinked and so collaborative as well, with how all of the different elements of design all kind of come together and sing. Alongside lighting, alongside sound, alongside so much. So designing for free roam experiences is one thing, but then Viola's Room is almost the other end of the spectrum, is the exact opposite, in that it's linear, is that it's audio. We've gone from 600 people a night down to 6 per show, and it's a very, very different kind of beast of a show. How was it kind of design? Well, how was it working on the Burnt City, and then how was it designing Viola's Room? Did it feel similar, or did it feel worlds apart, literally?
I mean, the role itself was quite different, because I'm coming in on the design side. So I'm coming in, and my main work is with the directors on creating the world, on building the concept, on working through what the experience is. There's no performers in the show, so the director's job is to direct the light, the props, the sound, how the audience move. It felt like they were directing the our movement through it as someone who's in the experience. So that side of it was different to my role on the Burnt City. The thing that was really interesting was that it didn't matter the scale of the show, the approach and the design principles remain the same. So we're never putting anything into the set just because it looks nice. There's always a reason. There's always research. There's always some grounding in the logic or the backstory or there's an abstraction of a theme. There's always some kind of logic to the choices that we make, whether, you know, even for like the color of the walls. So it was really exciting to see that through from the very beginning of the creative process through to the delivery of the space.
Completely.
So yeah.
And also with the Burnt City, we were working with multiple source texts, which acted as inspiration, with multiple images, with multiple pieces of music. Very different again for Viola's Room, where we were working in adaptation, but we were working with a written script for the first time. How was that working with, you know, because of course Viola's Room began in Punch Drunk's history a long time ago as one of the very first shows that we've ever done, but also it's an adapted text from a Barry Payne short story. How was that as a designer working with an adapted script? But also, how was it working with Daisy Johnson's brilliant writing?
Well, it was great. I mean, I love working with text. I'm really like, you asked at the beginning what kind of shows really draw me in, and the other side of the work that I love is like spoken word and poetry and really dense text stuff. I either want to see something that's an entire world, or I just want a single person on stage with nothing else and just the words. So actually to marry those two things up was really exciting. I love Daisy's writing. It's so beautiful. Like, she's such an exquisite writer that it was so rich to work with everything. And the real privilege of working with Daisy through that creative process as well was we were reading every draft, and inevitably by the draft that ends up being the actual show is much shorter than all the other things we've worked through. So there's so much imagery that found its way through into the show. We're not necessarily hearing all of that because it's like the 8th, 10th, whatever version of the script.
But it's there.
But it's
in
there
the
within the fabric of the world, and so that was really exciting, really interesting to work through that. And I find that when I'm starting a design, regardless, my research will always go to text and always go to origin and always go to particularly with this work, what sort of folklore and ritual is everything rooted in. So trying to find those, that the seeds that where we get to, where does it all start from?
I love that. And fairy tales and folklore is so rich in terms of the inspiration that you can draw, but also in terms of the world building. Again, there's so much to mine from it. I'd love to just, again, because I love being as nosy as possible with these things. But you speak of what's in the text that then maybe doesn't get through to the kind of the final script. But I know that motif has been really important for you, both in terms of leaning in, but then also kind of subverting it and messing around with it. Could you touch upon an instance maybe of when you're using an imagery or a motif visually within the space that, you know, started in Daisy Johnson's script?
I think one thing that really captured my imagination immediately, I cannot remember which draft this was in, but there's a description of a hare stretched out on a bed. And we're talking about Hugo, we're talking about the body of this boy, this man stretched out on a bed like a hare. And we went, I'm so sorry, I was about to say a really terrible pun. We then went down this rabbit hole. We went down a rabbit hole of the idea of the hunted and the hunter and that wild and natural environment. And so the imagery of the hare keeps returning because I think it's interesting with Viola as to whether she is, I'm always wondering how much agency she has in the story, whether she is under the power of something else, whether she's being pulled and forced to do something, or whether she is the driving force. And so the idea of whether she is hunting or being hunted, I really found all of that rich description in whatever draft this was, quite an early draft. So exciting. And the links back through to the gothic starting point, but also to the teenage girl who's got sort of, the old versions of herself, the younger version of herself laid through her bedroom, and sweet rabbits and bunnies.
Yes, and
that
cuddly toys.
yeah,
That
yeah,
I had
and
a soft toy
these
like that.
innocent things becoming this dark, wild part of the wilderness that
Yeah,
she gets lost in. So yeah, so that's a recurring motif throughout. The one that I love the most, there's one in the banquet because we really wanted to play with shadows. There's clear moments when we play with shadows. We play with shadows at the beginning as we go through our kind of um, fabric den pillow fort world. And then I really wanted to find opportunities to play with shadows later when they become more ominous. When we leave that childhood play world of, oh, I'm doing a shadow puppetry show, and it becomes, you know, I'm in a dark old house, or I'm in a forest, and there's a light, there's moonlight shining through the trees, and the silhouette of that, the shadow of that tree, is it a person? Is it something alive? Is
is it something monstrous?
Yeah, when you're questioning yourself. Because I love the idea of pareidolia, which is, you know, when you see something, a shape in a cloud, or you see you're in your bedroom at night and it's in the half light and you see something hung on the back of the door or a shadow, and our brains putting together the patterns, and it's an evolutionary thing. The people that survived and evolved were the ones that, if they saw a rustling or a shadow in the darkness in the trees, and every single time ran, the anxious ancestors
survive.
because every time they run away because they're like, that rustling or that shadow must
Means
be a
danger.
tiger, I don't know, run away. Whereas the people who didn't make that connection, you know, on the 10th time when it is a wild beast, they get eaten. So we've got this ability to see patterns and piece together patterns from things that aren't necessarily patterns, is something that's helped us to survive. And so yeah, I love trying to piece that together and form pictures where perhaps there aren't necessarily ones.
That's going to be the main thing that I take away, that the anxious survive. I love that. But also I think there's something really brilliant about being able to kind of really lean into patterns, but also lean into, is it innocent or monstrous? Is it, you know, dark or is it light? Is it, you know, can the unknown, can the ambiguous exist in a space at the same time? And what does it mean to kind of discover that? And then as an audience member, kind of decide for yourself within that. You mentioned Viola as a teenage girl, and I think there's something that I'm so fascinated by in terms of that adolescent period, the teenage years. How did Viola as a teenager come about, and why did you choose to have a teenage girl at the center of this story?
I think from the original text, from the Barry Payne text, it's obviously, it's quite, you know, it's a patriarchal story about a young woman on the cusp of childhood, adulthood, and this fear of you know, sexual awakening, liberation. And I think the interesting thing is that coming of age, that moment between where I think our version of Viola, our contemporary version of Viola, rather than it being this outside power controlling that, being on that cusp, it's that moment as a teenager where I don't know if she's sure quite yet, if she's ready to, she's like progressing, growing up, but also holding on to part of her childhood, like not quite ready to let go of that. Like there's some kind of fear in her too, and I think that was a really interesting thing to explore, and that it's not straightforward, it's not simple. We were so conscious that we don't meet her, and so we didn't want this bedroom to feel generic, and we didn't want her character to feel, you know, two-dimensional. And so actually that really helped with that layering of understanding what parts of her childhood were still present and what parts of her were beginning to move through and forward. And
but also there's so much that, you know, as a teenager you discover about yourself in those years, and there's a real fluidity of taste, of expression, of things. But then it's always, you know, what I love about the Viola's bedroom that you first encounter is there's so many remnants from her childhood that then live alongside and coexist with, you know, the new posters put up and the new everything. And I think there's something really interesting designing for that space, and designing for character, and designing for and discovering personality. as you work. Is it as simple as, you know, you went in and knew exactly who Viola was, exactly what kind of character she was, almost like a writer, and kind of being able to display that? Or was it an element of devising and discovering and, you know, adding layers of what kind of teenager Viola was?
It was definitely not clear immediately. It was much clearer who the Victorian
Yes.
Viola was, the Princess Viola was. That was much clearer to us. That's
From the
the
original story,
crucial thing that is explored in the original story and the main thing that we hear about from Daisy's text.
Yeah.
So the creation and the character building was very much a collaborative, devised effort with the directors to build out who she is. And you're exactly right. The interesting thing about designing for that teenage bedroom is layering the 5-year-old with the 7-year-old version of her, and then the 8-year-old, and it's like a snake skin, like constantly shedding. But there's remnants of each age remaining.
I love that.
So that was really an interesting way to explore the design layers of that room, and a hard balance to strike to try and pitch her age right, because we didn't want to pitch her too old, because she has to be on that cusp.
Yes.
She has to be within that moment herself where she's not sure where she's comfortable sitting. The other thing I love about the bedrooms is, and the idea of sleepovers, is that horror is often the first time that we encounter sleepovers are the first time that we encounter horror as a form of entertainment.
Yes, completely.
And
for me, it's, I mean, the amount of sleepless nights I've had at sleepovers specifically because of the scary story.
Yeah, and oftentimes it's not necessarily because, well, I don't know, this is personally and anecdotally, it's not because I was interested in watching a horror film or telling a ghost story, but it's because we were talking again about this earlier in the masterclass. That's our expectation of what a sleepover should be, and you've got all of these teenagers who are kind of unsure of themselves, like still trying to discover who they are, and still trying to. There's the private and the public. There's the part of themselves that they're trying to show to the world, and the part of themselves, and like, this is who I am, who they're trying to show their friends. The part of themselves that they want to plaster on the walls of their bedroom, and then the private, the part of themselves that maybe, what are they hiding? What do they feel? What do they feel shameful about? And I like, that's difficult and hard and horrible that teenagers feel that way, but they're just an absolute ball of.
I love it so much. But again, it's such a potent time, and I remember watching so many horrific movies that I was way too young to watch, but because I wanted to see cool. And I then just didn't sleep for another month after. But it was, you know, the what you're plastering out, but then also what you're kind of feeling within. And I think that kind of, that dichotomy is so delicious to explore. But also what I've been really struck by within Viola's Room is the amount of people, and it could be that they were on the cusp of that age during the early 90s or not. But there are a lot of people, particularly women, who come and they say they've never felt so freed by a theatre show, by a live experience that speaks so directly to their own experience growing up. And I was really curious about how you balanced you wanted to be universal, and you want to know that it's definitely a teenage bedroom that can be recognizable to so many teenagers, but also looking at the individual and looking at the personal. And I'm curious about how you balanced the two, both in terms of how universally it could be applied to all, but then also this is so specifically Viola's space and Viola's discovery.
Because you don't want it to be generic. You don't want it to be every single 90s teenager. It could be there.
You want it to be recognizable.
So I think the way through that was, if it isn't you specifically, it's, you know, it's the person that we knew from school when we were that age, or and also the logic behind what books and what films she's interested in. Like, what is her progression through? How does she get to, say she's reading a really key source text for me and for Hector and Felix was The Great God Pan by Arthur Machen. And so we featured that as a book that maybe she's just discovered. Maybe this is something she's just dipping into, like there's something scary and that she doesn't quite like, but she wants to find out more. And so we're like, oh, what's the work backwards from that? Where does she start with her escapism and her fantasy, and how does that get to horror? And maybe that gets to, you know, Goosebumps. And that lands us in our era, and then maybe the next step is going to that darker place that Arthur Machen and Henry James.
Yes,
Yeah.
completely. I love that. You mentioned Felix and Hector, our two directors
Yeah.
for Viola's Room. How was that as a kind of creative collaboration? Because of course it needs to be such a tight-knit creative relationship to have. Could you just unpack a bit about what that creative team looked like and how it was working with those two directors?
Yeah. Oh, I had a really brilliant time. It was really exciting. I'd worked with Felix before on The Burnt City.
Yeah.
My role there was broadly going, hey, what do we need to put in? What can we make happen? And
Yes.
making sure it was possible. And so it was really exciting to revisit in a new role. We worked really closely together because, as I said, their role was there were no performers, so we're working together on
Yes.
shaping how the audience move, or shaping how the lights make us feel, what the sound is doing to us, what the experience is without anybody there. And um, so it was quite an iterative, devised process in terms of building out our characters as much as the world, to make sure it felt detailed and layered. And yeah, it was really exciting, because the brilliant thing about working here is that anything is possible to be explored. So any idea can be thrown onto the table, and then the people that are surrounding you will help figure out if it's possible. You're not getting a hard no straight out the gate often, and so it's really freeing to be able to start at that point with the $1 million version of how we want to experience this, and then how do we creatively fulfill that. It's been really, really exciting. Yeah.
It's so exciting. And it is such a $1 million question, because it's also, nigh on impossible to know where to begin a lot of the time. So what's great about this space, but also Viola's Room, is that you start with a very empty shell of a space, and Punch Drunk works so site sympathetically oftentimes. So it's looking and responding to the building, and seeing its context and what creatively it gives the story, and then being able to have quite a kind of conversational relationship between building and story. But with Viola's Room, it's all built from scratch.
Yeah.
And so how do you design for a world that hasn't been built yet? How do you continue to design for as it's kind of being constructed? What was your starting point within all of that?
Within all of this, I mean, well, the very practical starting point was kind of looking at this ground plan and treating it like a game of Tetris.
Nice.
To try and fit in. We knew when I first met with Hector and Felix, they knew what their key story
Blocks,
structure points were, and so it was figuring out, how does that physically manifest? How does this kind of chart of post-it notes on a wall become a ground plan that tracks for the amount of time it needs to track for with the text? So that was very much a starting point, alongside the research and the reading, was going, we know we've got this amount of space.
And we know that this space needs X space, X room, Y room, and Z room.
Yeah, totally. And then using the space to find what that narrative arc is, where the crescendos are, and the pacing of it, because you're moving through it, and like not just the speed at which you move, but the scale of the spaces you're moving through. Scale became really a really important part of that, the emotional experience of the show for me, because oftentimes when you've been so contained, or what you're looking at is so delicate and small, the moments when you are opened out into larger spaces felt really crucial, and you want to juxtapose the smaller, tighter spaces with the larger spaces to get the maximum impact out of the way through the story.
I'd love to dive into that a bit more, because for me, passageways really fascinate me within Punch Drunk's work, because it kind of can often feel like not quite a negative space, but a passive space. Whereas every single space is really charged. And needs designing, with all of the detail of every single other space. And there's great kind of elasticity between moving between great spaces and small spaces. And you spoke about the emotional experience of journeying through. But I'd love to know what role the audience is literally journeying through, plays within your designing, and how you craft that journey and those passageways as a designer.
Well, with this show specifically, we knew that because the labyrinth is such a key element of this story, we knew that we wanted people to kind of lose their sense of direction and lose track of perhaps, as soon as we decided we wanted to repeat the bedrooms, and there was a lot of discussion about how many times we repeat them, how many times you go back, but we wanted people to really begin to question which bedroom they might be returning to, not knowing how far you'd come from the first one that you'd entered. So that, on a practical level, was really interesting to play with the design of, with the maze of it all, seeing how disorientated you can become, particularly with the first passageway, it being so that one colour kind of closing in around you. There's no key markers that you can, there's no landmarks along the way to help you. But in terms of passageways and thresholds in general with our work, it's actually my interview question for the Burnt City was about passageways and thresholds.
Oh, really?
Yes,
Brilliant.
and it stuck with me. It was just was such an interesting creative prompt. And we spoke about two spaces, a small cramped space maybe for like 6 people maximum, a low ceiling, like the room that the interview was happening in this kind of warehouse, and a large cavernous warehouse space.
Yeah.
And I was offered a well-known story that we all know. I was offered Dumbo. Do you know? I was like, yeah, I know Dumbo. I'm familiar with Dumbo. And the ask was to imagine what both of those spaces could be for, it's Dumbo. We're doing Dumbo. How would you do those two spaces? How would they feel different? But the most important part of the question was, how do you move between them? Because the transition from one to the other will change the impact of the one that you get to. Your experience of a space, your relationship to it can be changed by the way that you've entered it. It's whether you come into this bistro through the front doors, or if you sneak in through a passageway at the back. It's what does it do to your status as someone that's experiencing it, or how does it make you feel? If we're crawling through a den, that makes it makes us feel childlike, and it takes us back. It's I'm just awkward. I feel awkward actually.
But there's a childlike sense of discovery and wonder within that. There's something so brilliant about really kind of getting down.
Yeah. And so the question there being about how can that move between the spaces, how do they relate to each other, what's the relationship between the two spaces, is one of the most important things that we look at on a big free roaming show. And with Viola's room, the whole experience, because it's linear, becomes about juxtaposing each of those rooms and how each of those passageways connects and relates to the previous one.
Amazing. Brilliant. And within this, there's a question that I often get, which is, how do I even begin? It's brilliant having 100,000 square foot. It's brilliant having such a team such as Punch Drunk to be able to build a world. But I am just starting out, and I know that I want to work in a non-traditional way, away from the traditions of a proscenium arch theatre. I have a space, or maybe I don't have a space, but I don't know where to begin with building that world. What advice would you give to people kind of just starting out in terms of the building blocks that make really exquisite world building that doesn't need a massive budget behind it to still be vital and real?
I suppose there's two things. If specifically on a design end of things, people are interested in going into the design side of this sort of scale of work, then I'd say getting a lot of experience within different areas, different departments will really enable you to the reason that I was able to apply for those different roles in the Burnt City was because I'd done some time as a scenic artist in a workshop. I'd also worked on props and made puppets, so I had an understanding of what all the different roles were. And so when I'm working with carpenters, I'm not completely blind to what their job is, and so it positions you well to be able to understand how all of those parts move together. And then, of course, along the way, you do discover things that actually, like, I love paper prop detail, and then specialise in that, and then end up working in that field. And I've got a friend who was on Burnt City who, you know, paper props became her entire career.
Brilliant.
I'd say if you're a theatre maker or you're wanting to get into world build, or maybe the directing side or creation side of it, I think that, yeah, I think being limited, you shouldn't be limited by the fact that you don't have two ginormous warehouses, because actually the world building can come from just it can come from the narrative first, because the narrative is always first, even whether we're doing this ginormous thing or if we're doing something that is linear or something much, much smaller. If the narrative is solid, then you could create a kind of ritual or a myth around just a single prop and build out from there, because then that can become part of a wider like a wider fantasy that's created, you know. So I think that it is hard to kind of reckon with, you know, well, I know that I know that I do not have the budget to transform a warehouse, so how do I do something that is not traditional theatre? How do I do something that enables my audience to explore and discover and, you know, be imaginative? And I think site sympathetic is a really excellent way to begin to start that when you aren't able to transform a space. If you do have, you know, a space that already you can lean into.
Yes, I think that's exactly it, and I love the ability that actually there's an offering already there. No matter what the space is, there's an offering that you can lean into, that you can speak to. But also, I mean, you've spoken so beautifully about it. Like, what is the experience? What is the feeling of going into a space? And how can that be front row and center? Within any level of detail, there's a little kind of key there, which I really, really love. Brilliant. Well, so this is a beautiful moment to open up. I've been speaking a lot, and I would love to open up to the floor, both in person here, but also at home. And so, in fact, I think we've got some questions from our live stream. There's one from Aloso. I hope I'm saying your name correctly. Was the music already integrated within the story before you first started visualizing the set, or did the music come after?
The music came. Well, it was a very collaborative process, but Gareth, who's our sound designer, who is a genius, he came on board partway through our process. And then once the whole creative team was on board, we worked very closely because it tied up it is such a precision operation with the lighting, the sound and the set all singing together. So yeah, it was very collaborative. But yes, Gareth and Simon, the lighting designer, I can't remember the exact dates, but they came on at the point when me and Felix and Hector and Daisy had been working on the show.
And it's kind of all moves together in,
in
ways that it's so highly collaborative.
Yeah, and of course, the show had been percolating for 20 odd years,
because
with Felix from when the original version
back in 2000.
Yeah.
So in many ways, it's kind of Moonslave. It was called Moonslave back in the day, but it feels very much like Punch Drunk's, one of Punch Drunk's big origin stories.
Yeah.
You know, being able to kind of be developed over a 24-year period and then return to the roots. It's really, really exciting. Brilliant. Yes, we've got a hand just here.
Judging by the room, a background from the poster, the craft, to the choice of music, you could almost pinpoint which year she was born.
Brilliant.
And then, so I wonder that this choice of this specific time, this specific period, what sort of impact of this choice on the connection between the modern days of Viola?
Brilliant. So just for those at home, the question was about the fact that Viola is a teenager, and you can almost pinpoint the exact year she was born based on the inspirations and the posters of the music and kind of the influences of the design. What is the impact of choosing that specific time frame? And what's the relationship with the Victorian story and the Victorian princess?
Yeah. First of the choice of landing in the 90s, a teenager in the 90s, we did talk about whether it would be contemporary, whether it would be today, but actually the feeling of nostalgia, the feeling that really excites me of when I watch I don't know, like an old rom-com, or like when I watch something like Stranger Things.
Yeah.
That
Yeah, yeah,
feeling
yeah,
of
yeah,
being
yeah.
a teenager again, for the people that would be coming, well,
It's
they're gonna
so
connect
rich.
more with a
Yeah.
teenager of 1990, whatever it is, than they are of a teenager of today. So we want it to feel like me, the audience, I connect with that point in my childhood, so it's as close to us feeling like we're transported back there as possible, which of course is not going to be every single because every single person that comes is not going to have been 13, 14 years old in the 90s.
Yeah.
But that was one of the reasons I found that exciting, because watching some of the source material, watching some of the inspiration for the show, the films that inspired some of our choices, that feeling of being a teenager yourself, that feeling of like just being as close to walking in step with Viola as possible was really important.
Yeah.
So that was really exciting. And then we did talk a lot about a big part of the creative development was, what is this link between this girl in 1990 and this girl in 1890?
Yes.
And there was a lot of interesting discussion of what that link is, whether it is this feeling of this inevitability, this repetition. It's happened to her mother before her. Is this something that has continued to repeat over the years? In the same way that I really loved with the Burnt City, the looping, which we're used to in big masked shows, but in the Burnt City, how it is, these characters playing it out again and again, and Hades and Persephone are watching on and wondering if they're ever going to be able to break the cycle.
Yeah.
And although we don't loop Viola's room, this idea that it's just continued, and she do it again and again, and each month returning the same. Is she fated to this?
Yeah.
So that was a big part of the discussion, this relationship and this mother-daughter relationship. And then the other part that was really interesting and really started to unlock who Viola was the idea of her as an escapist, the idea of, wanting to hide from this, the modern world or whatever she was experiencing at the time, and disappear into a book, disappear into fantasy. And perhaps that starting as something innocent and then discovering these more gothic stories. And so that moment when you're a teenager and you pick up on a character that you relate to, and you feel, this is someone that is so far from who I am, but I have this connection. I suppose, like I was saying, like the shows that I love going to see are the ones where I'm watching it and I have this cathartic experience because it connects with something in me. I think that she connects with something in the book that she's picked up. Yeah.
Oh, brilliant. Excellent. Yes.
Hi, this question sort of relates to the Burnt City, and also kind of immersive theatre as a practice generally. I have a piece of immersive theatre that I did for an exam piece I am recently. I'm looking to develop it further. What advice would you have for kind of balancing audience interaction and progressing a linear narrative and kind of blending?
Oh, I'd say this. I'd approach the decision making, any creative decision making, whatever it relates to, whether it is to direction, performers, whether it is to design, is always go narrative and logic first. In the same way that every piece of furniture we choose, we're not picking it just because we like the look of it. We're picking it because there's a logic behind it. There's a reason behind it. I'd say the interactions that you choose, I'd say there needs to be, it needs to drive something forwards and change something. In the same way when you're writing a script, we never want to enter the scene and leave the scene and nothing has changed. Something, we have to move from A to B. Something has to change. So if there's no purpose to the interaction, if there's no purpose to the choice of the name of this bistro, then I'd say dig deeper and find out what that is, or find the Easter egg, find the logic. What does if we're going to name 3 buildings in here, we're going to make sure they mean something. So I think that can apply to any part of the creative process.
Brilliant. I've got another one online. And this one is from Harry. The design is a thing of beauty.
Yeah.
Was there anything that had to be changed, majorly changed, as you built it and evolved the show and worked out how it would work?
Oh, that's majorly changed as we built it. I mean, the whole build process was a learning process because we knew that we needed to figure out how we move people through this experience, and we had to discover that. So I'd say practically, yes, we were constantly seeing things, going, oh, how can we solve this problem? Maybe people are, we want them to stop at this moment. How can we encourage them to stop here? So there was the practical side of it. But creatively, I think there were no, handbrake turn changes. But there were things that were unlocked. Like as we discover more about Viola, as we begin to go, oh yeah, that's who she is, yeah. Then we were able to make more creative decisions that made the world richer. So I think that was more of a building on top of itself process, whereas the practical side of how does this work? We're not doing a free roaming show. Those were the things where it was like trial, error. Okay, yeah, try this. Let's put a curtain here. Okay, great, that works. Let's turn the light on a little bit earlier.
Yeah.
And okay, great. Now everyone knows where we're off to. So yeah, but yeah, it's very. We know that our process is the show does not exist without the audience moving through it, and so it has to be responsive to how it works with people inside it.
Yeah, completely. Yes.
My question is, what were your challenges that show, considering such a different format from traditional cultural show?
So the question for those at home is, what are the major challenges of this kind of work, considering, the challenges of traditional theatre by contrast?
What are the main challenges? I mean, again, I think they split into two sides of the coin. There's the practical challenges, and that was mostly how do we move through this? How do we keep people on track? We know that we want people to be able to explore and be curious and discover, but we know that we need to keep moving and to the next. So we get to the next scene in time, and we stay in line with the audio. So that was a challenge. That was a challenge that we knew from the off. We need to figure this. We need to crack this. Creatively, one of the interesting challenges I think was understanding, and we were discovering as we were piecing it all together, because it's such a sensory experience. Yeah. How can we deprive certain senses so we can encourage the audience? Can focus people in on the moment we want them to focus on? We were finding that if it's too much at once, if there's text, visual, I'm feeling something weird, suddenly I might stop paying attention to exactly what is being said. Or maybe I'm intently listening to something and I miss something I wanted to look at. And there's an amount of that I think is interesting where everyone's experience is different, but certainly there are moments when it was really important to take it to blackout so we can just hear the sound.
Yes.
Or where there's no text so we can really get the sensory experience. And finding that balance was a challenge, a good one, because we wanted to heighten the different senses. And so we didn't want to just get a wash of lots of things happening.
Sensory overload.
Yeah. So it's finding the moments where we did really want to focus in on one thing and the moments where there can be more happening at once. So yeah, that was a creative challenge on that side of it.
I think there's something so powerful about knowing how much to reveal and how much to strip away, and having that, there are the most powerful moments in so much sight sympathetic work are the moments of stillness, other moments of silence, other moments of darkness. And being able to kind of hold that and trust that moment is something that's just so special within design.
Yeah.
Casey J, that is our hour up. So thank you so much for joining me today. It's been such a pleasure sitting here and chatting with you. So thank you so much for joining. Thank you so much to everyone, both in person and at home, who have joined. This has been such a wonderful Q&A session. So thank you and have a wonderful rest of your evening.
Thanks so much. Thank you, Jenna.